Hello and welcome to the module of Data Ingestion and Management, and in this video we are going to learn about the batch-based data ingestion. In this video we are going to discuss first on an overview of batch data ingestion process, then we'll be defining about the batch data ingestion architecture on cloud, and followed by we'll be discussing about the batch data ingestion services on Azure, followed by a quick demo. So let's get started. The data which is basically being processed by the various sorts of parallelized jobs, so that has been typically being termed as the batch data input methodologies, and in which like the data ingestion can be also could be initiated by an orchestration workflow. So typically that whenever that the data ingestion that could takes places over in cloud or over in on-premise environment itself, so we have to be aware of that some source of the historical data that is also has to be recorded as part of our batch data ingestion methodology. Big data solutions, since they often use like the long running batch jobs to filter, aggregate and otherwise prepare the data for analysis. So typically these jobs involves like reading the source files from scalable storage like HDFS, Azure Data Lake Store, Azure Storage. It helps to process them and writing the output back to the new files in the scalable storage. Now the fundamental requirement of such kind of batch processing engines is to scale out the computations to handle a large volume of data. Unlike the real-time processing, batch processing is also expected to have the latencies, that's the time required between the data ingestion and computing a result that measures in minutes to hours. So typically if we have been talking about the various technologies that is being involved with the batch processing, that batch processing is being used with a varieties of scenarios, like from simple data transformations to a more complex ETL jobs, that is where we can build out the extract, transform and load pipeline or the ETL pipeline. The batch processing also typically it leads to the further interactive exploration of the data. It helps to provide the data modeling ready for this machine learning. It helps to write the data back to the analytical data store, which has been optimized for analytics and visualization. So end to end, that the data that could be further ingested and explored through the data storage from the various data sources like to blob storage, to data lake storage, to SQL databases, to Cosmos DB, and from there the data could be get processed through the various batch processing engines like through USQL to HD Insight. So HD Insight is an managed Hadoop services that is used to deploy and manage the Hadoop clusters on Azure, and for batch data processing and ingestion we can use the services like Hive, Hive LLP, MapReduce, Spark, etc. We can use Azure Data Lake storage because Azure Data Lake it's an analytics job that could be used for optimized for distributed processing over the large data set stored in Azure Data Lake store. Or in terms of data ingestion capabilities, we can also choose about the services like Azure Storage Account, like Azure Blob Storage as part of our batch data ingestion methodology. So the key selection criteria while we have been involving into batch data processing and the batch data ingestion of the data pipeline is that we have to answer the questions like, do we want to have a managed service rather than managing our own servers? Do we want to author the batch processing logic that could be defined declaratively or imperatively? Will you provide the batch processing that's typically in batch by batch basis, or typically it could be depends on the burst? Like we can consider the options that can help us to auto terminate the cluster, through which the pricing model would be defined on per batch job basis. So we can define such kind of the various capabilities and the capabilities matrices in terms of auto scaling, in terms of scale out granularity, in terms of query from the relational stores, authentication, authorization, security aspects and all together. Now, in terms of the batch data ingestion architecture, it consists of the various kinds of components. First of all, to start with, it involves with the data storage. So, data storage is typically involves with a distributed file store, which can serve as a repository for high volumes of large files available in the various file formats. It includes the batch processing, which typically just defines the high volumes nature of the big data, that includes a solution which must process the data files using the long running batch jobs, that's to filter, aggregate and prepare the data for analysis purposes. It can include the analytical data store that can involve and design to prepare the data for various analysis, and it can serve the process data in a structured format so that it can be queried by using the typical analytical tools. And furthermore, it also involves like the analysis and reporting purposes, like it can provide the insights into the data through the analysis and the reporting. So overall, the different sorts of batch data ingestion services which is available in Azure are like the types of Azure Blob Storage and Azure Data Lake Storage, Azure HD Insight, where we can run this like Peak, Hive, Spark, the various kind of jobs, that's for as a batch data processing scenarios. Azure Data Brick services, through which we can also perform like through the Spark SQL jobs, we can just run this batch processing of the data. Azure Databricks is a Spark based analytics platform, and we can think of Azure Databricks as a Spark as a services, through which we can just manage the fast clusters. We can perform like managing the Spark clusters. We can have the built-in integration with Azure Blob Storage, Azure Data Lake Storage, Azure Synapse, and we can also perform like end-to-end data orchestration and data pipeline development through Azure Data Factory. So in Spark SQL, we can perform like end-to-end data ingestion services in the batch data ingestion mode, either through Azure HD Insight Spark clusters or Azure Databricks managed Spark environment. So as altogether, if we just consider about the batch and the real-time streaming data services, so both the data storage as well as for the batch processing and near real-time streaming processing of the data ingestion, the batch data processing actually starts with the data ingestion through the various kinds of the data storage. The data which is in the formats of, it could be any of the particular file format, whether CSV, TSV, Parquet, or any other particular file format, or which it may also consist of the historical data that coming from the LOB, SAP, SCRM or MDM databases, the data that needs to be stored at a particular in-house data storage like in form of data lake, and all these big data solutions on the cloud that includes this kind of data ingestion methodology that involves the data that's coming from the various different sources, either from application data stores, either from relational databases. It could be static files that could be produced by the apps. It could come from the traditional ERP systems or CRM systems, or it could be also coming from the in-house MDM datasets itself for the batch data processing scenario. And after that, the data that needs to be stored in a traditional storage in terms of Azure Data Lake Storage or Azure Blob Storage for the batch processing operations, which can hold those high volumes of large files. The batch processing, which is basically just involves on the batch data that has got to be stored on the underlying Azure Data Lake Storage or Azure Blob Storage, which involves like processing these data files using the long running batch jobs to filter, aggregate and otherwise prepare the data for analysis purposes. Near real-time streaming or real-time message ingestion also involves like streaming of the data that allows for filtering, aggregations and preparation of the data for the analysis purposes. Now let's see a quick demo on the batch data ingestion. So here I am in my Azure portal, and as you can see that here is I have provisioned an Azure storage account where I can show you that in this Azure Data Lake Storage how we can just go ahead and ingest a data file as part of the batch data ingestion methodology. So here under the data storage options in Azure Data Lake Storage, upon provisioning, you could be able to see there's options called containers. That's actually just involves like the quick POSIX based the file sharing storage options that we have for Azure Data Lake Storage or ADLS Gen 2, where we can quickly create the containers. and you can just provide the accessibility details, like private means no anonymous access, or blob level access for ADLS Gen 2, where you can provide the anonymous read access for the blobs, or you can provide the container level access, where we can provide the anonymous read access for the containers and blobs. So once after creating these containers on Azure Data Lake Storage, you can just go ahead and select the container and you can start uploading the data files. So for large data, while you are getting ingested for the batch data processing, you can create the additional directories, or you can simply go ahead for simple data ingestion, you can go ahead and upload the data files. So once you click on upload, so you can just click on upload and you can just start uploading the data set in ADLS Gen 2 as part of your data ingestion methodology. So in this upload blob, you just can go ahead and select the options, that's to upload the data set. Just select the CSV file, TSV file that you want to upload into, and you can just go ahead and upload that particular file. So that is one of the options that through which we can perform like data storage options. And apart from that, through Azure Blob Storage itself, you can just go ahead and upload the sample data files. So here, for example, I have already uploaded a sample data file called NYC's cab file, that is a New York cab details file. Now after uploading that particular file as part of the batch data ingestion methodology, you could be also able to see like the details over this particular data files, like the properties, the versions, the snapshots, the tier details, or the view edit details, or the delete options. So these are the various options you could be able to find it here. In Azure Data Factory, you can also perform like the various sorts of operations, like you can transfer the data as part of the batch data processing pipeline, that you can transfer the data either from Azure SQL database to blob storage, and you can just check over the data files over there after the data got transferred into Azure blob storage. So say for example, here I have already transferred some sample data as part of my data operations, that my data transfer operations. So after the data that's got transferred into, so we could be able to just being able to see that the data which has got being transferred as part of the data ingestion methodology. So these are like the various services, the various options like through Azure Data Lake Storage, Azure Blob Storage, Azure Data Factory, through which we can just ingest the data as part of our batch data ingestion process in Azure. So in this video, we have covered the end-to-end batch data ingestion methodology with Azure. I hope this video has been informative for you, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Thanks for your time.